Another day, another rainy ambiance that's perfect for books. So today I'm very excited to be talking about chonkers, what I call any book that is 500 pages or longer. So this is the wrap up to my recommendations by book length series. But I'm actually going to break it up into 3 little parts of the video today. So I'm actually going to be starting with my 2 least favorite books I've ever read in my life. And I thought it would be good to start with this because when we think of large books, we can feel all sorts of intimidation. And I think these 2 books are very indicative of what maybe a lot of our fears can be when we think of picking up something large. And so I'm going to explain why I disliked these books, so that you can maybe reflect a little more on these types of things to decide what you would be more likely to enjoy that is a very long book, because you'll be spending a lot of time with it and it'll really become a part of your routine for a very long period of time, which is very special and cool, but of course can be intimidating as well. So I first off want to preface that both of these books were required readings for me throughout academia. So please note, if you're genuinely hating something that you're reading, let alone something this large, unless, you're required to read it like I was, please don't feel obligated to finish it. You're allowed to say, my time is limited and I want to spend this large amount of time with something, enjoying it, not hating it. So please don't feel like you have to stick with something when you're hating it. You definitely don't. I was in unique situations where I had to, but by and large, I have loved the books that are large that I have read in my life. But also, when I haven't loved them, I have DNF'd them. So the books I am most likely to DNF are large books or the start of a series, because those are just inherently much larger time commitments than standalone books. So please keep that in mind. You're under no obligation to commit to something that you're disliking. So my 2 least favorite books of all time. The first is The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. I don't even remember the characters' names. This was back in high school. I just know that I hated it. And so what I hated about The Fountainhead was that all of the characters were very manipulative. They were very narcissistic and self-absorbed and had very little to no redeeming qualities about themselves. As a very empathetic person, I found all of them so grating, so irritating, and I'm sure for some people they could find that really fascinating. For me, I like to find some sort of empathy with everyone if possible, so when I can't, it makes me really frustrated. And so, as you can imagine, when you're reading something that's very long, everything is amplified. So the characters, you're sticking with them a lot longer. The plot, you're sticking with a lot longer. Themes, you're sticking with a lot longer. And so if you don't like the characters, for instance, that's a lot of time to be spending with personalities that you find really, really irritating. And so if it was up to me, I would have DNF'd this book. That being said, I will give the writing credit that they were so insufferable, but that's a lot of time to spend with people. Like, you feel like you're trapped in a room. It's like those jokes online when people are like, when you're trapped in a room with your friends type, and you're like, let me out. Yeah, that's how I felt reading that book. The second one, this is even more of a hot take, and I know there's people with my favorite booktubers who are currently reading this right now, so no shade to any of these people. But my other least favorite book is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I will say I did not read 100% of this book, but I read enough. We had to read most of it in my American literature course in college. I was of the vein of people who found it very, very boring. And so to this I will say, well, first of all, I will say I actually really liked the beginning of the book, pre-sea journey. So I didn't hate all of it. I found the beginning very interesting, but basically my point here with Moby Dick, it wasn't necessarily the characters that I found very aggravating and tiresome, but rather I found the topics and themes very redundant and or just not of my interest. And I think Herman Melville, similar to Victor Hugo, who I've also read and loved, when some people are writing for long periods of time, they can get very, very rambly and very, very intricate in what they're talking about. And that's where it's really important to just keep in mind what topics actually interest you. I don't think this book is as black and white as either it's boring or it's not. And I feel like a lot of people will argue about this book because they feel like they have to convince the other side they're wrong and they're right. I think it can be a both and. I think it can be a really, really fascinating book for some people and a really, really boring book for some people. And I think it really just depends. If you find whaling and water and all of those themes really, really interesting and themes that you want to stick with for a really long time, or if you find them way too niche and not a niche that you're a part of, which is how I felt. So if you're like Emma from Emmy Reads and you love any sort of aquatic topics and being super in the weeds on them, you'll love it. If they're just like, they're fine topics, but you're not overtly zealous about them like me, you're probably going to find it really boring. So just keep in mind, especially if people are writers of large books who can be a little more rambly and meditative on topics, just make sure that they're themes that you really enjoy nerding out on. Otherwise, it's going to feel like one of those people who traps you in a corner at a party and is rambling about something that you really don't connect with them on. So those are my notes about, how you might fear picking up books, but with these things in mind, what you are or are not interested in, you can more easily, hi Nugget. Point being, just keep those things in mind and you can more easily decide if you want to DNF the book or if you're going to stick with the whole thing. Nugget has settled in my lap now, but I was gonna finalize this point in the first portion of this video by saying that it is very subjective. I could sit in the minutia of talking about music or like musical keys or scores or sheet music for a really, really long period of time, and other people might find that very boring. So yeah, just know yourself. And I think in general, whether it's a chonker or a tiny book, that makes reading a lot more pleasurable. Just knowing who you are and why and how that maps onto connecting with stories and storytellers, because I do think someone's voice and sitting with their voice is going to impact whether you love something or not. Part 2, I wanted to talk about the large books that I have loved in my life. I've not read an insane amount of large books in my life, but I have probably read over a dozen now in my life. I tend to not read more than 2 a year just because, I don't want to put myself in too much of a reading slump. Even when I love a huge book, it can just be a really weird, book hangover afterwards because you spent so much time with it and then you're supposed to, carry on like it was normal, even though no one I know regularly, book after book, reads huge books. So, yeah. It's nice to just give it the time to be what it is and then take a break from it for a while and then venture back into the experience of doing something for a really long period of time once more. So I have 6 main books that I've read that I wanted to talk about today. 3 of them were all-time favorites. So again, the encouragement that most large books you will venture into, you will love. If you don't, again, you don't have to read them all. You can just DNF it. The first book I wanted to talk about, I read the most recently, and that was Babel by R.F. Kuang. I feel like this one is definitely hit or miss for people. I found it lovely for what it was. Some people feel like it barely scratched the surface of what they wanted it to be, but Babel follows our protagonist Robin as he is rescued out of the cholera outbreak in China and raised in the United Kingdom. This is a historical fantasy in the 19th century, and so he, as you can imagine, he's very quickly westernized, and he grows up to go to Oxford and study translation. They have a specific translation institute and department building called Babel, which I love the spiritual allegory of. And so it has a lot to do with imperialism. It has a lot of great meditations on translation and how to give credit where credit is due for language, but also the huge tension of just working through how giving credit can sometimes come into tension with stealing and where those lines are. So there's a lot of good meditations. I found it to be a very meditative book. There was also a lot of plot. I did find that the pacing was all over the place, and at first really was unsure if I was gonna enjoy it. I think she was maybe just a little unfocused in terms of what she wanted to emphasize, which made the pacing a bit all over the place. But it ultimately came out to be some really good meditations for just my journey as I continue to read in general, especially as someone who's trying to read around the world. And also a pretty epic hero fantasy plotline as well, that deals with a lot of plot twists. And yeah, I found it to be pretty dynamic. Not the ultimate favorite huge book I've ever read, but it was gripping enough that I really was intrigued and didn't always know where it was going, which made the longer experience really fun. The next book is one of my all-time favorites, and I feel like I've talked about this recently, so I'm not going to talk about it too long. It's also probably the one on this list people have read the most, because it's not a classic, and that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. Markus is actually my all-time favorite author. I've read 3 of his novels and loved them all. This takes place in Nazi Germany. It's historical fiction, and we follow a young girl named Liesel as she and her family really work through and process how they feel about the current events, how they fit in, especially with the dehumanization of Jews at this time. And the title comes in because literature becomes a huge part of Liesel's journey and how she relates to others, and the joy of books and the joy of learning and words and the power of words in the midst of all of this political destruction that is going on. So it's just a beautiful story about so many different things. It's narrated by death, which I found fascinating from page 1, and you just know it's gonna emotionally wreck you, but in a really, really powerful way, and it did. So I would highly recommend The Book Thief if you've not already read it. I know it was very, very popular for a long time, for good reason. Please check out his other books if you haven't. The next one is also an all-time favorite. This one is my all-time favorite. I read the most recently. Coming in at 601 pages, we have East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is a really pretty copy. I did not actually read out of this copy. I read out of a library copy, but since bought this for myself, I do love deckled edges, so you can fight me if you don't. Half of these actually do have deckled edges. Yes. East of Eden. As you can tell, there's a lot of spiritual parallels, which is why I love this book so much, because I am spiritual myself. This is a family saga, so we start in, it all takes place in the Salinas Valley in California, and it starts with Adam and Charles, And there's an A and C theme after Cain and Abel. And then their sons are Aaron and Cal. So we follow 2 generations of these Cain and Abel figures and watch as they forge different lives, but also fall into similar patterns. I personally find that really fascinating with family, to really see how there's a lot of realism in generations in that way. Like, sometimes you learn and do better, and sometimes you repeat history. And I think using family as an image of that is really, really effective, because everyone knows, for better or worse, what it's like to be in a family, what it's like to love your family or hate your family for various reasons. And I think this story does that really well. I will also say, especially for a classic, John Steinbeck's writing is very accessible. It's very lush immediately in the first chapter. I knew I was going to love this after just reading the first chapter, even though it was only really setting description and not really any of the plot yet. It was so juicy with adjectives, adverbs, and I was so impressed by how vivid he crafted it all. And I'm pretty sure I heard that he'd never even been to that place before. So the fact that he just used research and his creativity to make something that vivid was also, in retrospect, very impressive to me. This has the creepiest antagonist I've ever come across. Her name is Kathy, and there's some creepy scenes that I will never forget, and I think she demonstrates that snake imagery really well. Also, for his time period, he had some really good meditations between characters on racism that I found awesome. And it just seemed really forward-thinking and empathetic for its time period, and it was just very impressive to me. It was a really good balance of plot, and I felt like I bonded with all the characters really well, but then there was also the overwhelming sense of the spiritual themes that I see in my daily life, and battling temptations, battling just saying no to cycles you don't want to continue to be a part of. There were some very powerful moments where characters really fought, even when it felt like their flesh wanted to take the easy way out. There was just so much spirituality to sink my teeth into the story, and I thought it was so beautiful and so well done. Such an epic meditation on humanity and all the best parts of humanity and all the worst parts of humanity, and I was so impressed. Speaking of classic authors who have very modern writing, I also find Leo Tolstoy to be very forward writing in his voice. I found it very modern, and I read Anna Karenina a few years ago and tabbed this one. So haven't always tabbed what I've read, partially because I didn't own them when I read the other huge ones. But this one, if you're curious, I tabbed purple were just all of my favorite quotes in the book. The light purpley white was all forgiveness themes, which I found interesting because there's a lot of shame and disloyalty in here. And then in contrast to forgiveness, I like to do a lot of contrasting themes just to see how they like relate to one another as the story goes on. The blue color was disgust, whether it was disgust with themselves or with other people. And so Anna Karenina is very complex. It was also a lot darker than I expected, but it was very well written. I gave it a solid 4 stars. By the way, I gave Babel 4 stars. I gave Book Thief and East of Eden 5 stars. So I gave this one 4 stars. Still really loved it, but it was a lot more negatively affecting on me than I expected. It has a lot to do with depression, so please know that going in. But this has a lot to do with infidelity. And so as you can imagine, that creates a lot of shame and isolation for Anna. Around that, in contrast, there's some sweet dynamics with genuine love and care, and Levin is definitely my favorite character. So there's a lot to do with loyalty or lack of loyalty, what love actually is versus what it's not, and how that all impacts mental health. I found this to be so much about mental health, which I was not expecting, but which I of course love myself. That is a type of meditation I could spend hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of pages meditating on. But he was so precise and so vivid with how he thought through the mental health here. As someone who's very empathetic, it was not great to be reading during seasonal depression because he was very accurate in how he portrayed spirals of depression. So please know that going in. And don't read it when you're already depressed, please. Please don't. I'm begging you. If you do find that you really love an author and their writing, even if you've never read a huge book by them, I feel like that's also a great gateway to get into chonkers, is taking authors you know have voices you already trust and starting a large book with someone you know that you trust to tell you a long story. The largest book I read in high school, actually there were two, the next two, Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. This one I remember the least, but the theme with all of these is they did not feel as long as they were because the themes are really engrossing, the characters were really lovable, and it always feels like it's the length it's supposed to be. If it was any shorter, it would have taken value out of the story. So Gone with the Wind has a lot to do with the Civil War era and Reconstruction. Specifically, we're following Scarlett O'Hara. So it is historical fiction and following her and her family and how their life transitions as the war is going on and as places are literally getting ravaged and destroyed. But then also there's a lot of romance embedded throughout the story. So if you're someone who loves a romance, this is going to be like one of the longest journeys with a romance you're ever going to have, at over 900 pages. So if you love romance, I feel like this one is maybe not talked about as often as other classics, at least in the spaces I'm in, and I know a lot of people love romance now, so I'm looking at all my women who love romances. If you've not read Gone with the Wind, you should read Gone with the Wind. It's not going to be a picture-perfect ending, but you will go through a lot of emotions, so that's all I'm going to say. And then the last huge and the longest, chonkiest book that I've read to date was, of course, as I alluded to, Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. This is a huge one. This is over 1,200 pages. This exact copy is 1,460 pages, but I think that's more because of this edition specifically. It's pretty small, so it's going to be a lot more pages. I did not, again, a theme here, I did not actually read this edition. I read the Penguin Black Classics edition, which was bigger than this and closer to 1,200, so like 200 less pages because it was bigger. This one, as you can imagine, I committed to. Number one, I added it to my to-read list for my AP class in high school, which I ended up only reading 3/4 of it, which my professor said was fine because it's so large. And then I ended up finishing it like a year later when I finally had the extra reading time again. But I loved the musical and the movie, And so I knew that I was committed to something this large because I already was familiar with the story, and I knew that this, of course, would have way more detail on the characters, way more backstory on the characters, and I knew that I loved it enough that I wanted more, which similarly you could do with stories like Harry Potter. If you love a movie or show adaptation and you want more information on the characters and story and you can't get enough, books are the perfect follow-up, especially if they're huge. You will get a lot more information. What I'm still impressed by is that someone took something this huge and condensed it into a musical. I just think that's insane. That takes a God-given talent, in my opinion. Don't know how you could possibly have done that. But this story is also a saga, clearly, because it's ginormous. This follows several characters, and I think that makes it interesting. It's kind of like pre-POV, multi-POV being a modern thing. So you're following different characters throughout different parts of the book, but the main protagonist is Jean Valjean, and he is an ex-convict who gets released from prison for stealing a loaf of bread because, you know, French Revolution, poverty, that's the setting we're in. And he has this really cool redemption arc. Even though, I mean, really, should he really have been imprisoned for trying not to have his family starved to death? Obviously, that's an ethical question. But we see him decide that he wants to live differently. However, his parole officer is the main antagonist, Inspector Javert. And Javert is just like obsessed with him ever since then. He's just like, ever since he leaves prison, cannot get over this man and is like obsessed with him for the rest of his life. So it has a bit to do with obsession. It has a lot to do with redemption. And then along the way, there's other characters that come into play, like Fantine and Cosette, and found family is a huge theme. Romance is also a theme. So it has a little bit of everything. And that makes it a really, really good story. It has war and adventure and violence in that way, and then it has romance, and it has everything. It has the scope of humanity in here, and I think that's what makes it really good and really impactful. And if you don't love one particular storyline or character, you're gonna love a different one. So I think it's really hard to go through a story like this and not like at least part of it. But I will admit Victor Hugo is very rambly at times. And so a lot of people will read the abridged version because there's specifically a part on the Battle of Waterloo. Again, if you're really historically nerdy, you're gonna love 50 plus pages in the Battle of Waterloo. If not, it's gonna feel like pulling teeth, especially because only the last page of that ramble is relevant to the characters and the plot of this story. So that's a huge piece that would be abridged out if that's not of interest to you. And then the other huge rambly piece in this book is about the sewers of France, because at one point Jean Valjean is escaping through the sewers from the war that's going on. And so if sewers are not of an interest to you, or city structure or architecture is not of interest to you, again, that's going to be really painful, and maybe consider the abridged version if you want less Victor Hugo rambles. Part of the reason I did skim through the Waterloo section again, though, was because I was reading that part during my AP required summer reading. So I think ordinarily I would have probably read the whole thing as rambly as it was. So bear that in mind. So the last section, I of course wanted to talk about some chonkers that I still want to read in my life. I have many, many books over 500 pages that I still want to read, but I did want to pick out a few that are popular enough that maybe some of you have already read them, or also want to read them. So if you have, please let me know if I should prioritize any of these, if you're also interested in these and want to buddy read them, or if in general they're just things that you're excited to hear me talk about. Please give me your feedback. These are not by far all of the huge books that I want to read, but I just thought I'd pick out a little bit of a genre variety to mention, show you that large books can be not just Victor Hugo, but also these are some of the largest books on my list that I'm the most excited to get to at some point in my life. The first one, as you can tell, I already know that I love John Steinbeck's writing, and so the other classic of his that I have not read yet that I want to is The Grapes of Wrath. So these are also by page number, so I'm going shortest to longest again. Pulled up the description. Is taking place during the Great Depression. And it is the Dust Bowl migration of the 1930s and tells the story of an Oklahoma farm family, the Joads, driven from their homestead and forced to travel west to the promised land of California. So California is tied in there again. Again, it looks very meditative, very moralistic, very thematic driven, and also a portrait of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless, of one man's fierce reaction to injustice, and of one woman's stoical strength. Captures the horrors of the Great Depression and probes the very nature of equality and justice in America. So, sounds like another story that's family driven, but also thematic driven, and I think I will probably also enjoy how meditative it is. This one's 536 pages, so it is shorter than East of Eden by a little bit. The next book is a classic fantasy writer that I have not read yet, and not classic like an old writer. It is a current writer. He's a very well-known writer, and I've never read any of his books, and I know most people I know have. And there are several people I will be giving my reactions to when I do pick up this book, because I know so many people are antsy to hear my reactions of this book, and that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is high fantasy. I feel like this is maybe the type of fantasy I've been searching for, a world that I can really sink my teeth into and just try to learn about and understand, without it being like about romance inherently. It's a decently long blurb, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, "For 1,000 years the ash fell and no flowers bloomed. For 1,000 years the Ska slaved in misery and lived in fear. For 1,000 years the Lord Ruler, the sliver of infinity, reigned with absolute power and ultimate terror, divinely invincible. Then, when hope was so long lost that not even its memory remained, a terribly scarred, heartbroken half-Ska rediscovered it in the depths of the Lord Ruler's most hellish prison. Kelsier snapped and found in himself the powers of a Mistborn. A brilliant thief and natural leader, he turned his talents to the ultimate caper with the Lord Ruler himself as the mark." But I believe my friends were describing it to me as like, it's very like element driven, like the elements are part of what form the magic system, I believe. I could be wrong, but I'm super curious to get into a very well developed fantasy world and just like look around and see how it functions, and I'm just very curious to have that type of experience again. So not just a fantasy world that's like used as a platform for a plot, but a fantasy world that stands on its own just for what it is. And I have a feeling that Brandon Sanderson is probably really good at that. So I'm excited to read Mistborn at some point. And it comes in at 541 pages. At 559 pages, I want to read the most iconic dark academia book there is, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is definitely going to be a autumnal read. It's both compelling and elegant, dramatic and playful. Under the influence of their charismatic classics professor, a group of clever, eccentric misfits at an elite New England college discover a way of thinking and living that's a world away from the humdrum existence of their contemporaries. But when they go beyond the boundaries of normal morality, they slip gradually from obsession to corruption and betrayal, and at last, inexorably, into evil. I feel like this is what Dark Academia has built itself upon, so I'm really, really curious to read it. I would assume it probably involves murder to an extent, just knowing Dark Academia in general. So I'm guessing it's some sort of thriller, and I'm really excited to get into it. That is the theme. I'm very excited, hence why these are on my list. The next one is a combo of fantasy and Dark Academia, and that is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. This book is 672 pages, so now we're getting a lot thicker. And this is the first of a trilogy. I don't know if I'll like this one, but it intrigues me enough that I really want to try it. It says Charlie Ovid, despite surviving a brutal childhood in Mississippi, doesn't have a scar on him. His body heals itself whether he wants it to or not. Marlowe, a foundling from a railway freight car, shines with a strange bluish light. He can melt or mend flesh. When Alice Quick, a jaded detective with her own troubled past, is recruited to escort them to safety, all three begin a journey into the nature of difference and belonging and the shadowy edges of the monstrous. So basically, I think it's like involving a school where all of these kids have these very unique powers, kind of like it just mentioned those two characters had. And from there might be a little bit of horror or thriller. So again, I don't know, like this might be too graphic for me in the end, and I might have to DNF it, but I'm intrigued. I am intrigued by the darker vibes. So I definitely want to at least try it, even if I end up unable to handle it. The booktuber I found who recommended it does read a lot of horror, but she made it sound like it's very tame compared to the other horror she read, which is why I was like, if it's just occasionally a little spooky, like, I think I could handle it, so we'll see. I'm definitely curious enough to try it. And then I have yet to read any Dostoevsky, so the one I have a feeling I would enjoy the most is The Brothers Karamazov. And this I basically know to be very like philosophical, where the brothers all have pretty different philosophies and worldviews. And so this feels just very meditative and abstract. And I know some people might find that very, very boring, but I love meditating on philosophy in creative ways, just like talking through the thought processes, whether they're having conversations or just internal monologues. It does seem like a very introspective type of book that I would be very niche and nerdy about myself. So considering that it's also very long, it does seem like something that's right up my alley. That's probably the book on my list other people would find the most boring. I have a feeling it's gonna scratch my intellectual itch just right. So I'm looking forward to that one. And then I know this is known as like the longest book that is the best paced, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I've still not read this one. I've heard only good things about this one. I think out of all of these, this is the one I've exclusively heard good things about from all kinds of people who don't read many classics, people who don't read chonkers and huge books. I've heard of it as like a revenge story. I've just heard that the plot and the pacing is unforgettable. A lot of people wish they could read it for the first time again. So I have a feeling I'll really enjoy it. but it's ginormous. I think it's like 1,200 pages, 1,276 pages. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to just decide when I'm in the mood for something that large, but I do feel like I'll probably find it very adventurous and fun for sure. And then last but definitely not least, this book is the tome of my life that I've always wanted to read, and I finally bought myself a copy, and just holding it in my hands makes me very emotional. I really can't explain why. It's one of those things where like I don't expect anyone else to understand why this excites me so much or makes me emotional to even just consider reading this, because I don't even fully understand myself. But for some reason, this book it just feels like the book I need to read before I die. But I also don't want it to feel cumbersome or like a chore, especially because it's the longest one on my list. So it's very much like waiting for the time that feels right to pick it up, but I'm so excited to pick it up. It also has deckled edges. Are we surprised? No. And I just don't have words. That is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And this copy, I just think the colors are gorgeous. The chandelier is gorgeous. This is a Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. I've seen several editions of this. I did a little bit of research and decided I was okay with this translation. It's Anthony Briggs. And also I know from Anna Karenina that I enjoy Tolstoy's writing, and I'm hopeful that this will be less depression heavy compared to Anna Karenina. So the chances of me giving it 5 stars, I would say, are good compared to Anna Karenina. This is just begging to be annotated. It's begging to be loved and lived with for a very long time, and I'm very eager to. The actual text of this book is 1,358 pages with an appendix and reference notes at the back. And this just feels like another one that's going to be about humanity. When something's this large and there's this many characters, there's just so many things it can be about, and that much more likely to be beloved because of the range of topics it can be about. I'll read the inside flap. It says, at a lavish party in St. Petersburg in 1805, amid the glittering crystal and chandeliers, the room buzzes with talk of the prospect of war. Soon battle and terror will engulf the country, and the destinies of its people will be changed forever. War and Peace has its backdrop Napoleon's invasion of Russia, and at its heart, 3 of literature's most memorable characters: Pierre Bezukhov, a quixotic young man in search of life's meaning; Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, I'm terrible with Russian names, a cynical intellectual transformed by suffering in war; and the bewitching Natasha Rostov, whose impulsiveness threatens to destroy her happiness. As they seek fulfillment, fall in love, make mistakes, and become scarred by conflict in different ways, these characters and their stories interweave with those of a huge cast, from aristocrats to peasants, from soldiers to Napoleon himself. Battles, love affairs, births, deaths, changing family fortunes, unforgettable scenes of wolf hunts, Russian dancing, starlit troika rides, the Great Comet of 1812, the entire spectrum of human life is here in all its grandeur and imperfection. In his magnificent new translation, Anthony Briggs renders Tolstoy's masterwork in stirring prose, both faithful to the original Russian and exquisitely accessible. New readers and rereaders alike will discover not just an exciting story, but also a deeply rewarding meditation on the tension between free will and fate as the forces of history move inexorably forward. Epic and intimate, compassionate and engrossing, this is the must-read. War and Peace. Yeah, this is my life book. This is what it feels like I've been reading my whole life for. Obviously, I'd be very disappointed if I don't like it. But just based on the description, I find it really hard to believe I won't. I know the hardest part will be keeping all the characters straight. I've already heard that. But again, I think if you just go slow and steady, it'll be fine. And I think what I love about huge books is they force you to go slow. And I think especially in our world today, that's a good thing. So I love the excuse to slow down and to really feel saturated in good characters and good storylines and not have to rush immediately to the next book because it's over so fast. There's such a joy to getting to stick with people for a long time because that's what life is. So it's cool when books emulate that experience of being with people for multiple seasons of your life. Even, you know, a book like this, you could read it over an entire year if you wanted to. And it's just cool that books can journey with us through so many different kinds of seasons and can really be companions just like people would be. And books get to be voices that we sit with that comfort us through so many things. And I think huge books are great reminders of how we can be comforted through writing, through people's reflections on the lives they've lived already and will continue to live. And I just think it's so cool that people give us such comforting encouragement and mementos of themselves that we can carry with through the rest of our lives and down generations and throughout the entire course of humanity, that we can pick up these life manuals to help us live easier and to just feel more seen. I've felt the most seen by large books that I've read, and their value cannot be overstated. So I just encourage you, if you don't very much, pick up a large book. It will be an unforgettable experience, and these have been some of the most unforgettable reading experiences of my life, and I think there's a reason for that. I think there's so much staying power when you sit with something for a long time, and I'm very grateful that I've gotten to do that and that I will continue to get to do that with the years and the decades of my life to come, Lord willing. So yeah, thank you for stopping by today. I hope that you're enjoying reading these days, and if not, that some of this can be exciting and inspiring for you to get back in. I know that's where I'm at right now, and I'm excited to sit down with a good book and some good characters and feel seen and understood once more. So with that, I'll leave you there. I wish the best for your week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, friends.